The summer I volunteered to restore the windmills of North Holland, the polder was supposedly the quietest place in the kingdom. Nothing ever happened except the creaking of timbers, the slap of canvas against wind, and the slow, patient heartbeat of water being lifted from field to canal. I had come from Delft, escaping a stalled graduate thesis on hydraulic engineering. Scraping moss from oak beams and repainting shutters seemed the logical cure for academic paralysis. What I didn't expect was that the sails themselves would guide me into a cat-and-mouse game with the most elusive art thief in Europe. My base was the hamlet of Zwanendrecht, 2 bus stops and 3 bicycle bridges away from any town large enough to claim a post office. Our crew, a handful of retirees, a Turkish exchange student named Ezra, and me, Elena Veld, was assigned to 3 separate mills. De Meerkoet and De Wacht both stood beside the same drainage canal. The third, De Zevensterren, sat alone between barley fields, on an islet reachable only by a narrow plank footbridge. It had stood idle for decades, its gears jammed, its cap stubbornly fixed facing east. From the beginning, De Zevensterren felt theatrical, as though it were only pretending to be abandoned. On clouded days the sails were motionless, drooping like a marionette at rest. But the moment wind freshened from the sea, they leapt into a stately waltz. Even so, nobody came to tend them. Old Jan Stieg, our foreman, swore the mill's owner lived in Singapore and had forgotten it. One July afternoon, paint-flecked and starving for sandwiches, I bicycled past De Zevensterren just as its shutters shifted. The 4 sails turned into a position known historically as quartier. The lower sail resting just below horizontal, the upper just above. Millers used it to say, "I'm away for a bit." I remember slowing on the path, thinking, away? Away where? No miller had been there all season. The same evening, the national news reported the theft of a Frans Hals portrait from a museum in Leiden. It was the 3rd high-profile theft in as many weeks. A Rembrandt sketch had vanished from Antwerp, a modernist Mondrian from The Hague's Kunstmuseum. Each time, alarms mysteriously disabled, cameras looped to black. Interpol suspected a single mastermind, but had no image, no vehicle, no clue. I didn't connect any dots until a fortnight later. Ezra and I were planning to replace rotten casings on De Wacht. As we loaded planks onto the barge, thunderheads rolled in. Gusts rattled the reeds. I glanced toward De Zevensterren, visible a kilometre away, and saw its sails in half-cross, or roo-stand, the morning position. No miller would announce a funeral in weather like that. The old code had been obsolete for 70 years, unless, of course, someone had revived it for reasons of their own. That night, curiosity kept me awake. I brewed tea, opened my laptop, and typed windmill signal code into every language I could read. The combinations were legion: begrudging, joy, short rest, long rest, fire, danger. Anybody with 2 sails, a wrench, and a tolerance for heights could spell half the alphabet. I dragged a notebook from my pack and began recording what I had seen. Quartier on July 4th, Rouwstand on July 18th. I circled museum theft dates. Patterns shimmered, signals hours before each heist, sometimes hours after. I plotted a crude cipher. Quartier, drop scheduled. Rouwstand, drop completed. Vreugdestand, celebration, might mark successful payment. Once the idea formed, it refused to leave. I biked out at dawn, hid behind alder trees, and watched through binoculars. Nothing happened for days. I nearly abandoned the vigil until the evening of August 2nd. A convertible Jaguar purred down the dirt lane to the footbridge, an absurd car for that rutted path. Headlights off, It stopped behind a thicket. 2 figures stepped out, one tall, coat collar up, the other shorter, carrying a square object wrapped in cardboard. In the gloaming, the mill's sails were aligned in vry, free position, 4 arms like a plus sign. The tall figure raised a phone, scrolled, then gestured. The shorter lugged the package across the footbridge, vanished into the mill. 5 minutes later, the sails shifted to quartier. Confirmation, I wrote, pulse racing. When the courier re-emerged empty-handed, the sails rotated once more, to Vredestand, the festive X shape. Jaguar doors slammed. The car backed out and disappeared. I cycled home as if chased by banshees. By 1 a.m. I had called the National Police line, stammered about windmill signals, art robberies, and Jaguars with Antwerp plates. The sleepy constable told me kindly to forward my observations to a detective in Haarlem and try to get some rest. Detective Franke de Waal, compact and blunt, met me 2 days later by the canal. She wore plain clothes but carried the aura of handcuffs in her pocket. "Miss Veld, you believe an internationally wanted thief transmits progress reports by rearranging ancient sails?" "I can show you the patterns," I said. I handed her my notebook. She paged through slowly, her poker face unwavering. "You have times, weather notes, and sketches of sail positions. The combinations match thefts within a 5-hour radius." I pointed at the page. "Look, July 18th, Roostand at 18:30. Museum director reports missing portrait found at 19:10. Guard shift change." Franke closed the notebook. "Interesting, but without direct evidence, photographs, license plate, interior shots, we can't raid a historical monument." She did, however, plant a tiny camera in the reeds and promised to monitor. Weeks passed. The camera captured foxes, storks, and a pair of teenagers sharing cigarettes, but no jaguars, no couriers. Franke called, apologetic. "Either your thief smelled us, or we're chasing phantoms." Then the Van Gogh disappeared from a private collection in Rotterdam, and De Zeven Sterren sailed Quartier 4 hours later. That was my breaking point. I refused to let canvas and oak mock me. If I could restore a worm-eaten gear train, I could crack a criminal semaphore. I bicycled to the mill at dawn, toolbox rattling. The door was padlocked, but any volunteer knows old Dutch locks prefer politeness to force. A wiggle, a slim screwdriver, and the shackle popped. Inside, the stench of dust and linseed oil lay heavy. On the main floor, sacks of barley rotted from a century ago. I climbed the narrow ladder to the 2nd level, expecting emptiness, but the loft had been swept clean. A folding table stood against the wall, topped with latex gloves, solvent, a halogen lamp, and tags from museums across Europe. I found a half-rolled canvas face down, a minor Courbet, judging by the corner signature. I photographed everything with my phone, heart hammering. Then I heard boots on the footbridge, 2 sets, brisk. I doused the lamp, eased onto a crossbeam above the stairs, and held my breath. The intruders came into view. The tall man from the Jaguar and a newcomer, barrel-chested, with a parcel under his arm. They spoke English with soft Dutch vowels. Barrel-chest said, "Buyer wants confirmation before Thursday." Tall replied, "Sales at 9 tonight, standard code." They secured the painting, wrapped in vapor barrier plastic, under the floorboards. 10 minutes later they left, never noticing the bit of sawdust on my hair. I waited until their engine faded, climbed down, and sprinted for my bike. Detective de Waal responded this time as though a siren were wired to her spine. Within an hour, we sat in the police post of Hoorn, reviewing my footage. "This is enough for a warrant," she said, eyes gleaming. "But if we go in tonight, they'll smell the raid and dump the goods. I'd prefer to nail buyer and thief together." My lungs still burned from adrenaline. "Then we send our own signal." Franca drummed fingers. "You mean change the sails?" I nodded. "We broadcast that the drop's been rescheduled to a different location, one we control." She grinned like a chess player spotting checkmate. Operation Polder Semaphore was born. 3 officers from the Cultural Crimes Unit arrived with black crates of equipment. My job, climb the cap of De Zevensterren and manipulate the sail angle precisely at 1855, sunset's golden edge, visible for kilometers. Rain threatened, then backed away. Wind held steady at 13 knots, perfect. I scaled the exterior ladder, canvas straps slapping against my thighs. Up close, the wood groaned like a ship, but the brake wheel disengaged easily. I braced my shoulder against the winch and spun the sails into Vragend, questioning position, a slight cant that historically asked, "Shall I grind?" According to the intercepted chatter Franca's text decoded, this shape now meant new drop point. I locked the wheel, descended, and ducked into the surveillance van. Officers tracked a burner phone linked to Tallman. 10 minutes later, he pinged a reply call, a single ring, confirmation. We answered with Quartier at 1920, signalling, "Await instructions." Stage 2 required a more audacious stunt. At civil twilight, I would reposition sails to VRIG, full cross, which in the new lexicon meant proceed to fallback location. That location, printed on an encrypted message Tallman trusted, was the boathouse of an abandoned cheese factory 5 kilometers downriver, already ringed by plainclothes police. We waited. My palms sweated. 2042 peach sky. I mounted the ladder again, heart pounding against ribs. The wind fought me this time, but anger lent strength. I forced the sail pair into the cross, pinned the brake, double-checked. Then, because spite is its own art, I added a flourish. 1 panel of canvas folded back, historically symbolizing urgency. Back on the ground, we listened to radio chatter. "Unmarked Jaguar headed south on Dyke Road," an officer reported. "We have eyes on a second vehicle, black Sprinter van, plates Belgian." I exhaled in triumph, thief and buyer converging. As the convoy vanished, we packed gear to follow. That's when fate threw her curveball. Ezra, who had stood guard at the footbridge with another officer, shouted, "Incoming!" A different car, a silver Tesla, glided to a stop. Out stepped Barrel Chest, alone, carrying bolt cutters. He hadn't gone to the fallback site. He'd come straight for the stash I'd photographed. Franca swore. Only 3 officers remained with us. The rest pursed Jaguar and van. She hissed, "Eleanor, stall him!" "How? Improvise?" I dashed toward the mill before logic could protest. Moonlight pooled over the barley. Insects hummed. The Tesla's door slammed. Barrel Chest hit the bridge at a trot. I met him halfway, waving a flashlight. "Sorry, sir, site's closed," I said in my best bureaucratic chirp. He squinted. "Who are you?" "Volunteer caretaker, structural instability." I pointed at an imaginary crack in the brick. "Dangerous, owner's orders." He lifted the bolt cutters, an unspoken threat. "Out of my way." I backed up deliberately, blocking the narrow planks. The footbridge creaked. For a moment he hesitated, aware one shove could drop us both into peat-brown water. Then, from the road behind, tires squealed. Franca roared up in the van, 2 officers piling out with tasers drawn. Barrel Chest wheeled, slicer raised. I seized the moment, grabbed a rope dangling from the nearest sail, and yanked. The brake pin slipped. The great beams groaned and began to turn, slow but unstoppable. Wind caught full canvas, the sails accelerated, whoomph, whoomph, each pass a giant scythe stroking the dark. Barrel Chest glanced up, just long enough for an officer to tackle him. He fought like a badger, but numbers won. Cuffed and furious, he glared at me. Saboteur, I smiled sweetly. Millwright, actually. The surrender of Tall Man and the buyers, cornered by the cheese factory, followed half an hour later. The stolen Van Gogh lay in the van, cushioned by velvet, alongside the holes, the Rembrandt sketch, and the Courbet from the loft. Interpol arrived before dawn with refrigerated crates, photographers, and grins the size of windmill sails. News vans descended next, and suddenly I was giving interviews beside De Zeven Sterren, hair plastered with grease, explaining quarter stands and morning crosses to journalists who thought every windmill rotated purely for postcards. Detective de Waal made me an unofficial cultural heritage consultant. She claimed I had provided the mechanical Rosetta Stone. Yet the better reward came weeks later, after the courts charged our thieves, real names Peter Van Klink and Maurice Lepage, with 17 counts of grand larceny and conspiracy. The absentee owner of De Zeven Sterren, jolted by the headlines, flew in from Singapore, toured his neglected mill, and offered a donation for full restoration on one condition: that I oversee it. So I stayed. Autumn sharpened the air. Flocks of geese drilled south overhead. We replaced the worm gear, recorked the cap, stitched new canvas. The sail tips gleamed white against cobalt sky. Tour groups started arriving, guided by placards narrating not only centuries of polder drainage, but also the modern chapter. How smugglers tried to repurpose the language of wind, and how volunteers answered in kind. One November afternoon, after the last visitors cycled off, I climbed to the windmill gallery alone. The sunset set the barley stubble on fire. I leaned against the rail and let the sails hum above me, no longer messages of crime or chase, but pure machinery at peace with the wind. Yet sometimes, on restless nights when gusts rattle window panes, I imagine glints of headlights far down the dike, a phantom jaguar returning for a rematch. If that ever happens, I know what to do. Because now the wind and I share a secret tongue, and together we can shout across the flatlands louder than thieves, louder than fear, and far, far louder than silence.